Hi everyone, welcome to Context is Critical to IT webinar. Today with me I have Jeremy Littlejohn, founder of Risk Networks, and myself, Matt Maloney, Senior Director of Agility Strategy. Before we jump into the webinar, I have a few housekeeping things to go over with you. Firstly, this session will be recorded, so at the end of the webinar, you'll receive a link that you can share with your colleagues and friends and also replay the webinar in its entirety. Your lines will be muted, and to ask a question, please type it in the chat box located in the bottom right of your screen. We do welcome questions along the way, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. This webinar is being played in broadcast audio mode, so please use your computer speakers to join or headset. So why do customers choose Flexera for their IT context and CMDB intelligence? So some of you may be aware, Flexera has been around for over 20 years now, but we've been focusing on the CMDB intelligence arena for the last 12 or so, and we acquired Risk Networks to help improve our intelligence there. And we've done over 14,000 assessments to date. We have over 5,000 customers, and as part of our journey, we've prioritized a lot of the intelligence that we've gleaned from doing our assessments and working with customers at a global scale. We have the industry's most comprehensive technology catalog with over 1.2 million hardware and software products that we maintain on a near real-time basis. And this includes things like end-of-life information, support, security, and so on. And over the years, we have developed a business service mapping technology, which is essential for context, that can increase the speed of business service mapping by up to 20 times compared to manual methods. And then lastly, what we've found working with our customers is we've been able to reduce waste in the IT environment by up to 5% on average. In some cases, many more, and we'll cover a case study in that in a moment. So when I'm talking to a customer, invariably I'll ask the question, what does your CMDB look like? What state is it in? In many cases, the customer responds saying, well, it's kind of this tangled mess of stuff. I haven't understand what it looks like. It's somewhat orderly, but I'm not really sure what to make of it. So the question is, what am I looking at? How is it connected? And is it really important and relevant? I talk to other customers, and they tell me that it looks kind of like a dump. This is the largest dump in China, and part of the problem is they've had this CMDB for so long that it's acquired all this craft. Assets that have come and gone, people have come and gone and added things in there they don't have context around. They've added custom tables, CIs, and so on and so forth. And by talking to industry analysts and experts and customers, what we found is up to 50% of data in a typical enterprise CMDB is junk. Now, Gartner predicts by 2022, up to 75% of CMDB projects will fail without service context. And that's the heart of today's webinar, understanding context in the sea of noise in your CMDB. Now, we have a pragmatic approach that we employ when working with our customers. Start with things that aren't being used. In this example here, you'll see this is a CERN data center circa 2017. They're in the process of updating it, and you can see that without all the craft, it's much more orderly and easy to understand what's going on there. Now, based on all the assessments we've done over the years, we've come up with a model for understanding what is being used versus what's not being used. We have sort of 4 profiles. Idle, which is not being used really at all, so less than 5% CPU memory. And what's important here is to understand that the idle resources aren't attached to a business critical service. So you may have some HADR infrastructure stood up that may not be utilized because it's set up in an active passive configuration. Unutilized means there's some utilization there, but it could be right for consolidation. So looking at over 500 enterprise environments, what we have found on average is up to 25% of the servers deployed, the software installed in those servers, and the associated infrastructure, supporting infrastructure, is effectively noise. Now, I'm not saying you can get rid of all of that necessarily, but the fact of the matter is if you have unutilized or basically idle assets, that is noise in your CMDB. So what is the impact to the customer? We have detailed information on the kinds of hardware and software deployed in these enterprise environments. And so we know, using industry standard pricing, what the cost is. So you break that down over a 3-year period, what we've found is customers can save anywhere from $850,000 to $1 million a year just by rationalizing and consolidating these assets. So we include things like DC cost, we include things like software licensing costs, and of course, looking at specific types of utilization. So idle hardware we found, in general, lower cost, unutilized, high cost, and then it goes up from there. So we've done this cohort analysis to give you this view into how much you can save by eliminating unused assets. So I'm going to turn this over to Jeremy to talk about a real-world example where Turner was able to leverage our technology to help rationalize their environment.
Great, thanks, Matt. And yeah, to follow up on Matt's point about the identifying underused assets, we engaged with Turner Broadcasting, and actually this engagement started as a cloud transformation engagement. What they were trying to do is uncover what applications they had within the environment that could easily be migrated to cloud if they wanted to begin to break down some of their on-premise assets. One of the interesting things about Turner, and it's not that different from a lot of the enterprise customers we work with, is that their environment is made up of really a bunch of smaller micro environments, right? So every brand at Turner has different applications, and they get to choose which applications they use. So it's a little bit of Wild West. So it was very difficult for centralized IT to get their arms around that. So we came in and helped them do that. We looked at, actually wound up being around 16,000 servers, 600 plus applications. So an application here we'll talk about is a ServiceNow application. And then they shut down over 1,000 servers as part of the engagement. So it was about a 10% decrease in the actual number of OSs they were running. So it was a huge cost savings, and they actually spent the first part of their project that was going to be targeted on cloud transformation, just kind of cleaning up their internal IT. So there's a lot of opportunity there in most of the customers that we meet with. The challenge, right, to that is that it's complex. And in many cases, we'll become engaged with a customer around an initiative that might not just be CMDB cleanup or cost takeout from the environment. It might be cloud transformation or containerization or data center consolidation. But a prerequisite to doing that type of work is to add the context. So if we don't have the context of a particular asset, meaning what application is it providing or participating in, what other applications depend on it, who uses it, how utilized is it. If we don't have all of that context, we don't have the information we need to be able to make choices about whether we should keep that asset or not. And we certainly don't have the information in our CMDB typically to do the things we need, like impact analysis. So let's talk about adding the context real quickly, right? How do we at Flexera add context, and how is it different? So a lot of service mapping technologies exist. But many of those technologies are what we would consider a top-down map. So this is very similar here, right? Most of the world we don't know about, most of our environment, we just don't. We know about a few things. So we know about these key applications that exist within our environment. And we do service mapping. So maybe we bought service mapping from ServiceNow or someone else, and we said, okay, we know about this app, and we know about that app, and we know about another app because we get support tickets on them, or we help install them, or they're critical to the business. But there's a lot of other applications in that same environment that we're not looking at. And much of the noise the waste, the security vulnerabilities, and the candidates for cloud transformation, things like that, sit in those other applications, those what we call long tail apps. So our service mapping approach is different. We're not going to go spotlight each individual app. The goal of the service mapping from Flexera is that we will illuminate the entire room, right? We're going to pull all the apps up and surface them. Then we're going to let you make micro adjustments to those as they fit your business use case. But we're going to surface all of those applications and, very, very importantly, how those applications interact with one another. So how do they share information? Where are they integrated? Where are they not? Where do we have an isolated application so that we can identify those things that, again, are good candidates for cost takeout or reclamation, maybe license harvesting, as well as things like cloud transformation, if those are initiatives that you're doing. So this is the major difference in our service mapping and our approach, is that we're going to find everything. We're going to service map the entire environment automatically in an automated fashion, and then we're going to let you begin to process those application portfolios for your different dispositions and to update your CMDB. So I'll turn it back to Matt now and talk about how that process flows.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. So I'm going to take you on a 5-step journey to context and ServiceNow enlightenment. We'll start with Discover, which is really foundational. And then this is where we collect, and now we connect with service mapping, which Jeremy just gave you an overview. So I'll do more of a deep dive on that. We then start to assess, then we understand the business service dependencies, and score those workloads, and then we make recommendations. Should I modernize? Should I migrate or not? And so on. And lastly, we don't optimize. This is the cost takeout piece that Jeremy mentioned and I've already touched on. Can we do a better job of leveraging our existing infrastructure and or cloud environment? And then, of course, we need to integrate and automate with ServiceNow, this is an ongoing journey. So in each of these stages, we are integrating and enriching ServiceNow in by direction, and we'll cover that in detail at the end. So let's start with Discover. So 3 key questions you want to answer with Discover. What do I have? How's it connected? And what is it doing? And really, how important is it to the business? So we've developed this technology over the last 12 years or so with an agent's approach to rapidly discover everything in environment, from network all the way to the application and business service. It's fast and it's accurate. We spend a lot of time making sure that we keep up with the rate of change in IT. We know that the rate of change in IT is increasing, and so it's important to have really accurate, up-to-date discovery data that can get fed in to your CMDB, in this case, ServiceNow. At the same time, we have the ability to bring in data from different sources. We're actually agnostic to that. So SNMP is an example, WMI, it could be network-level packet capture sources, it could be NetFlow, and so on and so forth. And then we layer on context at the service level. So we discover those relationships, which we'll talk more about in a moment. We also collect things such as the configuration of your apps and infrastructure. What ports are they talking over? What does the network configuration look like? What is the state of that device? We also collect things like performance and utilization, which is really important for cost takeout and also rationalizing your IT portfolio. And then lastly, we can also detect and analyze software utilization. And as Peter Drucker says, you can't manage what you can't measure. Discovery is so foundational and so important that we spend a lot of our time making that best of class, and that feeds into the service mapping piece. Now, Discover is not just about discovering what I have, it's also figuring out what don't I know about. And it turns out one of the interesting things we've discovered over the years ourselves is that, especially with the rise of shared IT and whatnot, is when you're looking at application dependencies, you find that there are dependencies outside your purview. For example, you may have a web application that's talking to something. It could be in Amazon. That could be something a development team set up that you didn't know about, or it could be in an MSP environment. But the point being is, it's essentially you understand the things you don't know about and you address those. So not only can we discover obviously what you have purview in terms of you have credentials and network access, But because we're able to get those relationships, we can also tell you what you don't know, and that's really important as well. We can break it down by device types, location, OS version, so on, so we can categorize, and again, this is normalized for you. And then taking it up a level, we can give you a visual representation at a geo point of view. So bringing in geo-IP information and augmenting that with your IP address information, so we can give you sort of data center proximity relationships and kind of overview of your IT estate at a global level. Okay, so now we've collected all this rich information. It's time for us to connect it with service mapping. We'll start with infrastructure first, then we'll look at application dependencies, and then that gets built up into your business service view of the world. And along the way, we'll look at configuration as well. So as Jeremy touched on this earlier, when we started out down this path, customers would ask us the question, can you help us with application dependency mapping? Can you help us with infrastructure dependency mapping? And the goal is to understand what things are related to what from a business service standpoint. If I make a change in my environment, how do I know that's going to impact, for example, my ERP application stack or not? And so this is kind of the standard view you get with a traditional mapping tool. Everything's connected to everything else, and there's no sense in this sort of sea of noise. And so we took a different approach. We've actually patented this technology that allows us to think about these relationships we discover differently. And what we do here is we actually treat them as time series. So in this example, I'm showing you a SQL server that's talking to a ServiceNow bid server. It turns out that there is actually a CMDB synchronization job going. So we're propagating data from our SQL server into ServiceNow. And this is a long-running connection, and data is being passed both ways. So by looking at data being transferred, looking at the tenure of the connection, and there's some other data points as well we look at, we can infer this is important and that these things are related. Now, on the other side of the coin, you have things that probably aren't as important. This is a NFS server, which is a file server, that may be serving out files every now and then to the mid server here in the center. And this could be for propagating patches, or other things like that. But the connection here happens every now and then, and not much data is transferred. By applying this technology, you filter out a lot of the noise, which is what hinders a lot of the business service mapping processes and makes them elongated and time-consuming. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we also bring in infrastructure, or say L2 and L3 perspective as well. So we can bring in your MAC address tables from your switches. We bring in your routing information as well, L3 point of view. And this gets fed into your application map. So one thing to call out here is if you're trying to understand, if I make a change in my environment, or say I want to upgrade a server, or say I want to expand my actual service, you need to understand what the impact is. So looking at the application dependency view here, you can see if I make a change in my ERP environment, I probably need to update my Graphite monitoring service on the top of the screen here. There's also going to be an impact possibly into my configuration on my mid server for ServiceNow. So it's important you understand all these cascading dependencies, because when it comes to having accurate CMDB, you need to make sure that when you make a change, those changes are propagated across the board for all of your business critical services. So taking us up a higher level, now we can start to look at the business services as a whole. Now, what's interesting here is, no surprise to hopefully folks on this webinar, each business service has a set of common dependencies. This could be Active Directory, authentication service, like Okta. It could be networking, okay? But the point being is, not only are you looking at application dependencies within the application stack itself, you're also looking at the business service level. And on the top left-hand corner here, you'll see a red box and these two business services called Order App 01 and Order App 02. We will actually automatically identify these business services for you. We'll apply a label, not the most original label, of course. You can actually create a rule to actually create a label that's appropriate for the business. The point being is, we will do this work for you, okay? So highly accurate and highly automated. You don't have to deal with this yourself. And you keep this running. It's a continuous process. As changes happen in your environment, you spin up and spin down elements of your infrastructure application stack. We'll keep track of that for you. And then drilling down deeper from a configuration standpoint, you want to understand what databases are being mapped to these application and business services. So if you're doing a consolidation project, which database should sit on the same server or set of servers potentially? If I'm making a change to my database servers, what apps will be impacted? Do I have to change my waitness window or not? If I'm migrating to the cloud, do some of these databases make sense to move there, right? Do I want to leverage RDS and AWS? You can answer these questions with this point of view. Okay, so now we've collected, we've connected, it's time to start scoring and assessing these business services and dependencies. So the first part of this will identify and assess infrastructure problems, which can get propagated into ServiceNow, and then we'll score the applications and the workloads associated. So in this example here, we're looking at performance issues in our Windows environment. And it turns out that these Windows servers are overloaded. Now, we go through a set of checks that can be propagated automatically into ServiceNow as a set of incidents that you can drive automation around remediation of and escalating as needed to the respective service or infrastructure owner, okay? And then taking us up a higher level, we can also do a 360-degree assessment. So in this case here, we're looking at Autodesk, a fairly heavyweight engineering application. And we're doing a couple of different things here in this view. One is we're looking at the cost. If I want to move this application to the cloud, what will be the cost for me? In this case, it's going to be more expensive to move to the cloud. The second order question is, why is that the case? Well, if you look in the right-hand corner here, you'll see that CPU memory, storage is probably okay, but it looks like traffic, looks like networking is a significant cost factor. And if you drill down the configuration, it turns out in this case here, when using unicast versus multicast. So it can help answer some of the media questions around, well, actually, I could probably move this app or maybe refactor it so it's more efficient in my environment. But I can't actually ask those questions or answer those questions without this information in one place. And on the right-hand side there, you'll see a topology view, how everything's connected. And then looking at the complexity of an application on the right-hand side there, there's a 4-box quadrant. We look at number of internal and external dependencies. And the left-hand side is a performance view as well. And then we track that in the bottom over time so you can see if you're getting better or worse, or is the application becoming more ungainly to manage. Okay, we've assessed now, it's time for us to make some recommendations. We have enough data to give you a perspective on what you should be doing. I want to touch on cloud migration briefly. It is a hot topic, and it keeps reoccurring in various customer conversations in terms of, hey, we need some help with our cloud migration strategy here. I'll dig into the workload scoring model, and then I'll cover briefly how you identify high priority workloads, whether it be for migration or modernization. So Cloud First Strategy is a top 5 2019 initiative. This came out of the State of the Cloud survey we did earlier this year. If you haven't reviewed it, I recommend strongly you should review it. And Gartner put out a notice in Q2 that the top CI challenge is the pace of change, lagging in digitalization, and talent shortage. And all these things are recurring themes in the data we're collecting from our customers in terms of pain points they're running into. You can see here the cloud challenges in the State of the Cloud report mirror what Gartner's saying, lack of resource and expertise, security compliance, cloud migration, and managing software licenses. All of these things actually hinge on one thing, configuration and having good quality configuration and context. So let's dig into our workload scoring model. As you recall, we've done over 14,000 assessments over the last 12 years, and we've come up with a model that simplifies how to understand your IT environment. So in this case here, we've got these 14 dimensions from cloud cost, number of connections, number of users, to tags, device tags, storage, and so on and so forth. We take these 14 score dimensions, which seems rather ungainly, but it's not. We convert that into a simple R-score metric, okay? So here's an example of what this looks like. In this case here, we're looking at workloads that are a good candidate for cloud migration that are high priority to the business. And so if you look at the top 2, payroll is pretty important, right? That there may be a SaaS equivalent version we may leverage for that, but the point being is based on all those dimensions, we've identified payroll as being a low risk and high value app to move to the cloud, factoring in cost, complexity, management, and so on and so forth. You can change this, you can customize this for other initiatives. This could be modernization, this could be consolidation, So this is totally extensible and customizable. We can change the weights on the right-hand side there, low connectivity to low device count. And so this is extensible, but we do have out-of-the-box support for some of the more common use cases to help automate this process for you. Okay, so now we're at a point we can start doing some optimization. We have all the data we need. We've made some recommendations. Now let's look for some low-hanging fruit to potentially eliminate or consolidate. We'll start with infrastructure, then we'll focus on applications. We'll touch on end of life and at-risk services, which should be part of that consolidation analysis. And then we'll finish up with license harvesting. So we collect historical performance data over time. And what's interesting, you start to see some anomalies in some environments in terms of how resources are being used. So in this case here, you'll notice this is a CPU of one of our servers. The usage pattern varies dramatically. So the old way of designing data centers was you would design for the maximum potential capacity you would need 3 years down the road, 3 to 4 years down the road. And that was very expensive because you'd have a lot of idle resources sitting around. You may or may not ever get to that level of consumption or utilization. With cloud, that changes everything. You can scale up the scale as you need to. But at the same time, even in the on-prem environment, there's opportunities here to rationalize this further, consolidate similar workloads and so on. So this could be a development environment where we may want to turn things off after 5 p.m. on weekdays, and we don't turn things on during the weekend. In a production environment, you probably can't do that. But again, you can be more intelligent about how you manage your VMs and maybe even containers. Okay, so this is a key area to focus on when it comes to consolidating and eliminating unutilized infrastructure. Then the applications on top are fairly straightforward to look at. So understanding which apps aren't being utilized much at all, looking at the resource footprint. And then in the case of Windows in particular, and this is also true for Linux and Unix, you look at services that are never started. If the service is never started, the app's not being used at all. And then on top of that, you want to factor in end-of-life support and vulnerability information as well. And we cover the full gamut here from hardware, network switches, all the way to Windows server environments, Unix and Linux server environments. And so this should be something you look at in tandem because this may trigger a different path you move forward. If a server's end of life and it's not being used, that's pretty much a no-brainer. If it's being used, then you have to think about modernization possibly. What are my paths there? Again, we can help you with that. Then lastly, we want to look at opportunities to harvest licenses, either retire them or reallocate them. Now, we have a industry-leading world-class SAM solution to help you with this. This is a complex domain unto itself. The things you should be looking at is current usage in Windows, Windows Server, MS SQL, SharePoint usage, Oracle, IBM, Autodesk, and other server applications. Look at what's the cost of deploying on-prem versus cloud, not just from a licensing standpoint, of course, infrastructure as well. And then, of course, bring your own software license analysis. Azure has bring your own software license benefit program. Okay, it's called AHUB versus AWS, maybe more expensive. You may want to think about potentially leveraging or modernizing your application to reduce the cost there. It's hard to do this without a mature, robust enterprise SAM solution. Okay, lastly, let's talk about how we integrate and automate into ServiceNow CMDB. So I'm going to turn this over to Jeremy to walk us through this.
Great, thanks, Matt. So I'll talk through the options that we have around how this information goes into ServiceNow and then what can come out of ServiceNow. So we have a ServiceNow plugin that's available in the ServiceNow marketplace. We actually have multiple plugins, but for what we're talking about today as it relates to service mapping, we have a plugin from Risk Networks that makes this available. It will automatically push data into ServiceNow. It can also sync certain data from ServiceNow over into the Flexera platform. It will automatically extend the CMDB data, so that's a choice. I'll show you a detail on that in a second that the customer can make. And then it will automatically also map those existing application relationships. So let's talk a little bit about where we're trying to impact. This is the ServiceNow Common Service Data model. And really what we're looking to do is add application and technical services into ServiceNow automatically so that you don't have to go through the ServiceNow service mapping process in order to have that information there. As I mentioned to you before, our approach will be to map everything. So all of the assets will appear mapped into some application. And then you can then begin to work within ServiceNow or within our platform and have it synced to ServiceNow to arrange those in the order and in the perspective that makes sense for your business. This is how that works. So at the top, ServiceNow exists with their business service CIs and asset CIs. Today, our integration is one that will allow you to create new tables. Therefore, you don't have to deal with like, well, who wins, right, in this scenario. If we have some stuff mapped in ServiceNow, are you going to overwrite that? Are we going to delete that? As I mentioned before, we're not going to delete anything. Instead, what we do is we build new CIs for the new enriched information that's coming into ServiceNow, and then we automatically build relationships within ServiceNow to your existing information. And so you can use those relationships or the lack of a relationship, for example, to show where ServiceNow might have older data, meaning it has assets in it that no longer exist based on the discovery. It will also show you where it has data that conflicts, right? So ServiceNow says we have these two applications where we're showing that they're 1 or that they're 4. And so you'll be able to see that delta. How does that look inside ServiceNow? So you can see this is the plugin, Risk Networks. Here on the left, it's a free plugin from the ServiceNow Marketplace, and it will create the tables that are necessary for the data to flow in. What we do is that we then begin to sync that data. It syncs on a nightly basis by default, although you can set whatever the sync period that you want is, and it will pull the data over into ServiceNow. Now, we will then apply all of the information and enrichment that we have that Matt talked about today, all the tagging, all the scoring, all of that will come in to ServiceNow, and you can then act on it. As I mentioned, what we do is we build a relationship in ServiceNow called identical. So we're not going to overwrite your current asset data that you need for stuff you're doing, okay? We're not going to get into a fight about that. We actually use what's called the Identification and Reconciliation Engine, which is a native ServiceNow feature. When we present a particular asset to ServiceNow, we say, hey, do you already have this asset? And it will use the IRE to say, yeah, we do. This is it. If that exists, we will build this identical relationship for you. You don't need to do that. The identical relationship then allows you to reach through your existing assets into the ones that we've placed in to pull the service mapping, to pull the workload scoring, to pull the lifecycle information, to pull the performance information, so that you can then create workflows to do things like, retire devices, as Matt mentioned, creating tickets and incidents on performance issues, right? So you can reach through that without needing to change your existing information. So what is some of that information? Well, application context, tiers, business services issues, tags like rehosting or replatforming for cloud transformation. Basically anything that you can tag within our environment will then appear within ServiceNow for you to act on. And these are examples of reports that are built in ServiceNow for that, for customers. So it might be, hey, I want to see the delta between what Risk says or what Flexera says we have and what ServiceNow says. Okay, that's a report. Hey, I want to see which applications are impacted by end-of-life devices. That's a report. So you can do all of that through ServiceNow, and we're supplying that enriched data for them. Lastly, because of the way we do the integration, you can then view that within ServiceNow, right? So if you're used to using that, you say, hey, I don't want to necessarily log into the Flexera platform to check something. Will all of that come over? Yes, it will. So this is an example of visualizing our information within the ServiceNow portal. You'll see the details here. We're showing how one business service or application depends on others. So again, that view is interesting in the ServiceNow world, how we get that. We can see what constitutes an individual business service. but how do we understand how that business server exists in the portfolio of business services we have? And so that's a view that we bring automatically into ServiceNow, and you begin to see that. So your impact analysis cannot just be like, oh, I'm taking a device, what other devices or business services, but I'm taking an entire business service out of service, I'm retiring it, I'm migrating it, I'm consolidating it, what's going to be impacted? This is an example of performance incident automation, as we mentioned, bringing over those checks that we do and saying, hey, if there's an issue, let's go ahead and create an incident that we can automatically start acting on. So I'll give it back to Matt now, and we can answer questions in the Q&A about that integration if anyone has them.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. So have you realized by now, context is critical and how we can help provide context and shed light on your CMDB in ServiceNow. So I've taken you on a journey from discover, service mapping, assess, all the way through to integration automation. And what we've found working with our customers over the years that we can help accelerate their business service discovery journey by up to 20 times, eliminate 5% of the underutilized infrastructure at a minimum, and improve the accuracy of their ServiceNow CMDB and CMDBs in general, not just ServiceNow, by 25% or more. At the same time, Jeremy just showed you we can provide additional business service context to ServiceNow, and we can decrease risk, improve security through workload scoring and understanding the state of end-of-life information, support, and even vulnerability data. And lastly, not a focus for this webinar, but it's something that we do on a regular basis, is we can help our customers accelerate and de-risk their cloud migration. So it is time for questions and answers. We actually have quite a few questions already lined up, so feel free to ask those in the Q&A box. So I will start with the first one. So the question is, how is your service mapping different? I'll let Jeremy answer this one.
Yeah, thank you. And there's also a related question, how do we establish the application grouping? So let's talk about that. We have 2 patents on this. So we took a different approach. When we approach a customer, we're going in with no a priori knowledge about the environment. So if you do top-down service mapping, it requires a priori knowledge. You need to tell it where to start. Go here, start there. Go here, start that. And then it does fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The issue is, what about all the stuff in between those 2 points? So ours actually flips that on its head. And we say, we will collect everything. Then we're going to use an algorithmic approach. We use some machine learning, some standard algorithms that we've written around how do we break that environment then into those application stacks. And that's why we say, hey, we're going to disposition everything. So anything that's in our data set, any server, load balancer, router, switch, IP phone, anything that you bring into our data set and license, right, that you want us to look at, will be placed into an application stack so that the entire environment is dispositioned. That's the major difference between us and a top-down ServiceNow, where you've got to go and repeat the process over and over and over again. In this case, we're going to say, nope, we've got everything, and everything got dispositioned with the click of a button. Now, as I've mentioned a couple times, realistically, what we're shooting for is 90% completeness there. What do we mean by that? Well, we may take your, you have a CRM application and you have a MicroStrategy or Tableau server that reports on it for executives. We'll bring those together because we say, hey, that Tableau server uses the same database. You may then, as the customer, say, actually, I see why that is, but I'm going to break those apart because we could swap Tableau for MicroStrategy or Tableau for Burst or something else, right? And so you may decide you want to tweak that slightly by pulling that out, creating a new business service or application stack for Tableau. And that's that process, that last kind of 10% process that people would typically do. And again, the difference there is you probably, in a top-down, you might never even find that application because of the way it behaves. And so that's the major difference in our service mapping, and that's what we utilize to find the application stacks.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. So I have a few more questions. I just want to, one that keeps recurring, popping up is, are the slides available for download? Yes, they'll be posted up in SlideShare after this presentation webinar. So look for a link on that. And another question that came up is, how does Flexera Discovery work with ServiceNow Discovery? Is it complementary? Does it replace it? That's a really good question. I'll take the first part. Is it complementary? And then I'll let Jeremy speak to the second part. So it is absolutely complementary. In fact, how we've set this up is it augments Discovery in ServiceNow. So we're able to link to existing CIs that have been discovered through the ServiceNow Discovery process. It is up to you if you want to replace some of that data. Our approach is it's better to augment than replace, because there may be reasons why that CI is in there and it may be maintained by a separate process. So we tend to be passive there. We don't necessarily overwrite things and not trying to figure out who's the master and who's not. And so that's generally on the customer side of the house. But Jeremy, do you want to add some color to that?
Yeah, sure. And that Matt's description is absolutely correct. So we are not looking for you to say, oh, I'm going to get rid of Discovery, because Discovery feeds a lot of things for ServiceNow, and we certainly don't want to rip those values out. We want to enhance and augment them. As it relates to how we do it, it's actually very similar. I would not even, and when we talk to customers and we talk about discovery, which for us is finding things, what's there, what's plugged in, what has an IP address, right? What's running? It's an IP camera, it's an IP phone, it's a workstation, it's a printer, it's a et cetera. There's not a ton of differentiation in that, right? For any of the products, ServiceNow to us, to Flexera, to BMC, to anything, right? We're all going to have techniques on finding those things. The question is then, what do we do with them? And so as we come upstream into service mapping and finding out which applications they're part of and collecting the information needed and the analytics around, should we still have it? Is it end of life? All of that enriched content is where the roads split, right? And things become different based on the solution you're choosing. So our methods will be similar. It will be agentless. It will be, standard protocols. There's nothing exotic about it. We're not white hat hacking your environment. You're not going to find a ton of difference in our discovery versus what ServiceNow is doing as far as populating the asset. It's, again, what we're going to do past that with service mapping and the contextual data that will begin to reap benefits for you guys.
I have another question for you, Jeremy. How do you help me clean my CMDB or keep it clean?
So it's a process, right? What we're going to do by creating these links, right, giving you another source of data, another source of truth, right? We're saying, okay, we ran this. In a lot of places, these will agree. Okay, great. Now I have validation of what I had before. In a lot of places, or I don't know if a lot, in some places, they won't. There's old CIs in the ServiceNow that don't exist when we look, right? So usually what will happen is someone will write a report about those differences, and then they'll process that. When it gets to business applications, that's a whole different animal. So, for example, what Turner did with their approach was they identified business services or individual servers. It could have been something a department stood up and never put in production or something, and then they just left it running, right? So when they identify those assets, the first thing they do is they put a firewall rule around them. So they say, okay, we're going to put in a change order request, block these IPs. And then they notify support. They say, we're going to block these IPs. It's something we're doing on purpose because we want to test whether or not there's, what happens. Because we've already shown them it's not communication, but that doesn't mean that once every 6 months somebody doesn't, log into it or something. So what they want to do is make sure that there's some time period where no one has access. However, I haven't shut it down. And then once that time period eclipses for them, I believe it was 6 weeks. So when 6 weeks goes by and they haven't heard any noise about it, they remove the actual asset, then they would refresh the CMDB either with the ServiceNow discovery or using ours to say, okay, that's gone now. We actually will mark those devices as what we call decommissioned. So if you had a device yesterday and today you don't have that device, we will flag that device as decommissioned. We'll tell you when we saw it go away. And then you can go into ServiceNow and say, okay, I can remove those CIs, right? So we're not going to automatically start ripping stuff out and deleting stuff, but we're going to give you all the information you need to run that process in a manner that works for your business.
Thanks, Jeremy. So I have one more question, which I'll take. And other folks who have asked questions will definitely follow you individually and answer those for you. So the last question is, how does Flexera track, monitor, report on those applications moved to the cloud? Understand how it can identify opportunities to move to the cloud, but what about after the move migration? That's an excellent one. And this question does come up quite often. Once customers have moved a significant chunk of their portfolio in the cloud, how do they provide the same level of visibility? So we support cloud environments just the same as we support on-prem. And we actually have a variety of different solutions to help give you that same visibility. So FNMS, our SAM product, works in the cloud, so we'll give you that SAM perspective of your cloud environment. We have a cloud management platform that also includes a cost optimization solution called Optima, which again looks at all your cloud services, IaaS, PaaS, and so on, and gives you that single pane of glass for doing cost optimization, utilization analysis, and so on and so forth. So the short answer is it's a little bit different. We have different solutions for cloud, but we can give you the same visibility. So I think that's all we have time for questions. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Much appreciated. I look for a follow-up with the recording of the webinar as well as the slides that we presented today.